and joining us. So over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Rob. Here we go. So, uh, good morning, everyone. So I'm pleased to be here this morning to share some thoughts and then connect some dots from a perspective with you. The budget that was handed down on Tuesday departed from the usual philosophy surrounding past federal budget in that it is free from the constraint of budget repair. Now, given the Australian economy rebounded from recessionary conditions last year, and there is ongoing uncertainty of the global economic environment, and also the vaccination program to get the pandemic under some semblance of control, this switch in rhetoric to spending for recovery and growth provides the right underlying setting. Now, the two crucial assumptions of the budget this year to achieve the population-wide vaccine rollout by the end of this year, and also our international borders will reopen by the middle of next year. Specifically, the goal this year is to drive down the unemployment rate below 5%. And the hope is then for the wage growth rate to pick up. Now, as far as government spending is concerned, we can broadly classify them into two categories. We have the transfer payments. So the examples would be the JobKeeper and the JobSeeker scheme. JobKeeper ended this March, and JobSeeker is the new program that for the unemployment insurance. And you can think of these as acting as wage subsidies for workers. And the second category would be the more traditional stimulus that's looking to support the economy by directly boosting the level aggregate demand in the economy. So one important ingredient here is the size of fiscal multiplier. So this is basically the bang for buck coming from budget spending. In a macro environment that we have right now where output is below full employment, coupled with low interest rate, the expectation would be that the increase in national income coming from additional dollar of budget spending should be reasonably large, at least compared with normal macroeconomic times. And so one important aspect here is that the government support needs to be sustained because it needs to respond to any potential scarring in the labor market. So we may have people that will be separated from employment on a much more long-term basis. So that's important. So if you think about from this sort of first point, essentially that the paramount goals in the short run at least is to get the cyclical side to get the cyclical aspect of the economy going again, get unemployment down, expand aggregate output, and you can see the forecast that if things go the right way, we should see output rising, unemployment falling, and of course, the other very sort of important aspect here is for wage growth to actually pick up, and so that would be something to keep an eye on. So now let me try to connect to the second dot here. So even though that this is not something that is outside of the framework this year, but let me still ask the question. So with all the spending that's going on, is this sustainable? So in other words, that as the government borrows to spend, is the fiscal cost of public debt sustainable? So let's think in terms of the ratio between public debt and national income. And the goal here is to stabilize that ratio. So one succinct way is to look at the difference that you see on the screen, which is between the interest cost of servicing the debt and national income growth. And there are two possible cases that can come out of comparing these two. The first one is less desirable, where the interest cost is actually higher than national income growth. So what's happening here is if you want to stabilize that debt ratio, we'll be looking at either higher taxes today or in the future. The second, more desirable case is where the economy is growing faster than the interest cost of debt servicing. So in this case, that if you have a growing economy, in fact, that is going to shrink that debt ratio, keeping without altering the current level of taxes. So essentially, that getting economic growth, so really so accelerate the recovery and shore up this economic growth is quite important in this aspect as well. So let's put some numbers into this very simple framework here and see how Australia fares. So according to Robert Barrow from Harvard, the long run average numbers for Australia is 3.3% for R and 3.4% for G. Um, so economic growth in the long run just outpaces the interest rate, the interest cost. There are also a couple of economists from the Reserve Bank. Another way of looking at this measurement of R is by looking at what the interest rate would be in equilibrium in the long run. So they've estimated some numbers for that, and they actually see that it's trending down over time. And so for the foreseeable future, I think it's you know it's a good bet that we are looking at R less than G, which is the more desirable case. So you can see that from the Parliamentary Budget Office on the left, the prediction is that in the medium term, economic growth is expected to be higher than interest rate, which leads to the forecast on the right that there will be decreases in that debt ratio. One potential caveat here, of course, is that should there be increases in global interest rates, because um, global investors are becoming a bit more averse to potential inflation risks, so they exit government bond as an asset class. Well, this might spill over to the Australian market and then pick up that R. Now, let me now connect to the third point here, which is um, the goal of driving down unemployment, get output up, and get wage growth to pick up. Well, that's sort of very much the short run measures, if you like. So aggressive fiscal stimulus to boost the economy from the aggregate demand side. But if we are to move along the time horizon and think in terms of what's going to happen in the medium run future, then we ought to really see these two macro policies. So the federal budget, the fiscal policy, and monetary policy coming from the Reserve Bank side, they really need to work together because if you think in terms of the various policy goals that we have for our economy, we can condense them down to two things basically: price stability and full employment. So we really need these two things to work in unison. It is actually interesting that at the moment, our Reserve Bank, as an inflation targeter, has indicated that they like to keep monetary conditions loose until such time that they see lower unemployment that will push up wage and price inflation. And at the same time, the Treasury is telling us that um, the uh, the goal here is to continue with the stimulus activity until such time that there is a sufficiently higher level economic activity. Then they're looking to taper that. So essentially, what this demonstrates is that it comes back to this very um, sort of old principle that you really need two policy instruments here. So the federal budget can't do it alone. You need fiscal policy and monetary policy to work together in order to hit the two policy targets of price stability and full employment. And then lastly, I want to again connect this to wage growth. Um, Now, part of the story here is that as the economy um, recovers, accelerate, and then sort of be on this much more firmer path of growth over time, the government is looking to complete the handover back to the private sector as really sort of being the primary engine of growth. So the crucial part of that story is to get a decent rise in wages. Now, again, you know, being aggressive with the various stimulus measures, That's basically looking at this wage growth story from a fairly sort of cyclical viewpoint, in that that drive unemployment down, and that would then signal or signify tightness in the labor market, and the employers would be basically chasing after workers and bid up wages. So that's really sort of a very simple sort of dynamic here, and the hope here to get that wage growth to pick up over time. But we might need to consider that there is another possibility here, um, regarding the sluggish wage growth, which would be a much sort of slower moving background, a structural driver. And essentially that there may be fundamentally a mismatch here in skills in the labor market between what firms are looking for and what workers are able to offer, because of new technologies that exist in the markets. And so what might actually happen here, a potential outcome here, is that if we were to drive, basically with this singular goal of sort of driving down unemployment, those industries and workers that actually fit the description of what the firms are looking for, these people will be sort of in the sort of favorable industries. And these people will benefit from wage rises, but then will actually accentuate the overall inequality of wage distribution in the labor markets. So this would be sort of different to sort of more broad-based increase that might be required for the economic recovery that the government, indeed all of us, are looking for. So systematic development of education and training would be quite crucial here to remove those structural impediments. Okay, that's all I want to share with you, and thank you very much.